All right, well, I think we can get started here. Just some housekeeping items. During the webinar today, we are recording this session. So all attendees are going to be muted for quality assurance. So that being said, we're going to do a Q&A after our presentation. So for the last probably 15 minutes after our presentation, me and Sean's will be taking questions through the Q&A piece of the Zoom session. So we would just appreciate everybody just wait until the end and then we'll do like I said, the last 15 minutes we'll do a Q&A and I'll answer the questions that come in as they come in. Right. So, well, good afternoon and good morning, I guess, depending on where you're at this hour. My name is Andrew Scampone. I'm a technical manager for Michael Baker International, located in the Pittsburgh office here in Pennsylvania. I lead a team of GIS associates and specialists in various broadband work that we are doing currently at a local and state level. We primarily focus on application design, survey, data collection work, spatial analysis, and planning. Also, I have with me today is Sean Carlton, who's going to be the primary presenter on today's call. Sean is also on my team. And Sean, would you like to introduce yourself?
Everyone, my name is Sean Carlton. As Andrew mentioned, I'm a GIS specialist with Michael Baker. I have roughly 13 years of GIS experience in broadband and land acquisition. I've worked with federal agencies, local and state governments, and NGOs throughout my career. This work has included federal land, right-of-way and broadband mapping, creation of web applications, geospatial training, and technical support. Thanks, Andrew. Back to you.
All right. Thanks, Sean. So just, the reason why we're doing this presentation today on the FCC Broadband Serviceable Location Challenge process, just because it kind of ties in with the DATAMARK. I know we're using the DATAMARK platform today, and just for some people who aren't aware, DATAMARK is the public safety practice of Michael Baker, and then DATAMARK and broadband, both practices are within the Consulting and Technology Solutions group at Michael Baker. We call it CTS. And we are partnering on broadband initiatives because we see value not only in the stakeholders from the broadband perspective, but also in the broadband efforts to support next generation 911 and public safety. So they kind of go hand in hand with the fabric challenge in terms of determining if structures exist or do not exist within the fabric. As you guys are all aware on the call today, FCC is moving to improve broadband because it's become a necessity in today's society, more or less. The Broadband Act pretty much set forth the improvements in accuracy of the current FCC maps. The FCC set up to improve the location of the broadband service into a more granular way than at the current census block level to figure out who's really truly served and unserved. The FCC's efforts are going to the structure level now, where homes and businesses and community anchor institutions, where actually, where public safety locations are within these CIAs, EMS, fire, police. So they all kind of tie in together. FCC is going on that structure level to determine where broadband service is available. The FCC is now standardizing these locations through the use of the broadband fabric. Any government agency has the ability to challenge the validity of this fabric database, in which the FCC is now using to determine where structures exist. So pretty much that's why we're here today. and I'm going to pass it over to Sean in a second, but Sean's going to present to you the FCC Broadband Serviceable Location challenge process and kind of show you the step-by-step process on how to first even acquire the fabric from the FCC. And then he's going to show you what he'll provide you different information on the different types of challenges that you can go against that fabric when you submit against it. So that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Sean, and he can kick us off. So.
Thanks, Andrew. Let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Everybody see my screen okay? I'm going to take that as a Andrew, thumbs up if you can see my screen. No?
I don't see your screen yet. So.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. The fabric challenge process is highly technical, and there are a lot of moving parts. So we might not touch on everything in great detail today. At the end of the webinar, we'll post a link and a QR code to our challenge hub, which is constantly being updated as relevant information comes out regarding all of the challenges, which are fabric, fixed, mobile, and BEAD. I'll also share our contact information so that you can reach out to Andrew and myself directly if you have any questions after the webinar. We're all here today to learn as much as we can about the fabric challenge process. As I mentioned earlier, the process has a lot of moving parts: data specs, portals, and documentation, which can be time-consuming to navigate. My hope today is that everyone leaves here with a clearer picture of what is entailed in the fabric challenge process and what exactly the fabric is. The purpose of the fabric challenge process is for the FCC to collect granular data to better determine where broadband has been or could be deployed. The challenge process allows the FCC to collect that data to maintain accurate maps in order to distribute broadband funds to areas that are most in need. Many of us are familiar with the current broadband maps and where they're lacking granularity, which is why the FCC is taking on this massive task of updating the data to be far more accurate. For those of you that aren't familiar, the current national broadband map depicts census blocks as the most granular level, determining if a particular location is served or not. This means that if a single household in a census block is served by an ISP, the entire census block is considered to be served. This level of granularity is a byproduct of the 477 data submission required of ISPs. In order to get the most accurate data, the FCC has set up a challenge process where governments, service providers, and other entities can challenge the accuracy of those locations to further refine that data. Providers are now required to file availability data using fabric locations, so the availability data is becoming more accurate as well. As I mentioned in the last slide, the challenge process is vital to ensuring that the fabric is up to date and accurate, but there's a lot at stake, and there are a lot of implications behind accurate data. Through one of our projects with the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission, community conversations were held and documented how Pennsylvania residents were using the internet, as well as some of their stories. This slide contains the common ways that residents were using the internet, as well as actual stories from community conversations. So while we may be talking about data points today, keep in mind that each data point in the fabric is a real person or family, and every fabric point added as a broadband serviceable location will positively impact an individual, a family, and the community. Although these are Pennsylvania residents, their stories are similar across the country. If you're interested, you can read more of their stories, and we'll post a link at the end of the webinar. Here's a high-level overview of some of the topics I intend to cover today regarding the fabric challenge process. First, we'll talk about what the fabric is, as well as what the fabric is not. I'll do an overview of how you can access the fabric if you have already not done so. And then next, we'll discuss various types of allowable challenges. We'll cover how you can access and navigate the BDC system and challenge submission process. And then finally, we'll talk about what's next on the horizon and some potential resources. For those of you that don't know, the Broadband Serviceable Location Fabric is a large data set comprised of over 100 million points indicating locations where broadband has been or could be deployed. This data set covers every US state and territory as well. It is important to keep in mind throughout this webinar and as you navigate the challenge process that fabric locations are at the structural level and not the address level. This means that although a condo might have 50 units with 50 unique addresses, the condo structure itself is the broadband serviceable location and is likely considered only one broadband serviceable location. CostQuest Associates has been contracted by the FCC to build and maintain the fabric, and we'll talk a bit more about them later in the webinar and how they fit into the challenge process. For those of you that haven't received or seen the fabric, it consists of two CSV files. One CSV file is the active file, which contains the location records for over 100 million broadband serviceable locations. The secondary file contains additional addresses corresponding to the location IDs that have multiple addresses. Question that comes to mind for many is what data sources make up the fabric. CostQuest aggregates many data sources using complex processes and algorithms. The data sources can be anything from satellite data to address data to tax and land records and everything in between. It's important to point out that the fabric for various geographies could be comprised of different data sets as well, meaning that Alaska's fabric sources might be very different from the data sources used in Hawaii versus the sources used in a rural Midwest county versus what was used in Washington, D.C. When you request your fabric for a particular geography, think about the various data sets that could have been used to create that fabric, strengths and weaknesses that may be associated with the data being aggregated in a particular area, and where the challenge process fits into the weaknesses of those potential data sources. After all, any data set is only as good as its underlying sources, which is why we're here today to make improvements to that data. When you receive your fabric, you'll receive a CSV with various fields used to describe all the locations within the requested geography. And this image is the data dictionary released by CostQuest that describes the fields as well as the data types. I'm not going to read through all of the data definitions and data types, but one thing that I want to draw attention to is there are fields in the fabric output file that are common to the fields required for challenge submission. Those fields are highlighted in red. You'll also notice that zip suffix isn't highlighted in red. In the Fabric Challenge Submission data spec, there is a zip code suffix field that is required in the CSV. So while zip suffix is close, it is not a precise match in terms of data formatting, which we'll go into the importance of formatting a little bit later in the webinar. The reason I highlighted these common fields is so that when you're creating your methodology for challenging fabric locations, these fields do not need to be modified to match the FCC data specs, which might save you some time. One question a lot of people have is, how do I go about accessing the fabric? As with everything in the government, there are a lot of acronyms being used. So there are some acronym definitions in the lower left, which you'll hear quite a bit throughout this webinar. FRN is your FCC registration number. CORS is the Commission Registration System, and BDC is the Broadband Data Collection. First and foremost, access to the fabric is free. The fabric access process varies based on if you're a government or a provider. If you're a government entity, you'll first obtain your FRN username and password from the FCC in CORS. You'll then use those same credentials to log into the FCC BDC system. Once you log in, you'll select your FRN and fill out the information pertaining to your entity, and you'll select crowdsource and challenge data. This is somewhat of a hard stop in the process while the FCC staff review and forward your information on to CostQuest, which can take roughly 3 to 5 business days. Once CostQuest receives your information, you'll be prompted by them to create a CostQuest account. Within that account, you'll submit a license request form, and CostQuest will send you a license agreement, which stipulates any use constraints of the fabric data set, such as who you're allowed to share that data with and what exactly you're allowed to do with that fabric data set. When you submit the license request form, you'll want to provide the contact information of anyone you would like to have access to your fabric file. This can be additional staff within your organization or a vendor or third party that you may have contracted with to help you out with your challenges. When determining any sort of data sharing, review carefully the agreement that was executed with CostQuest so that you aren't in violation of any aspects of the agreement. It is also important to understand what you're allowed to do with your fabric file. For instance, Tier 2 licensees are not allowed to use the Fabric file for anything other than participating in the BDC. This means it cannot be used for commercial purposes, network planning, or anything else that isn't related to participating in the BDC. Once the ink is dry on the license agreement, CostQuest will then prepare your data and email a link to everyone listed on the license agreement. For providers, the process has a few less steps. Essentially, if you're a provider, you email CostQuest requesting access, and the process is the same as governments from there on out who are requesting access. Since providers submit 477 data and are obligated to submit availability data for the BDC, they already have an FRN set up in CORS, which is why they don't need to go through this process again. If you have any questions regarding the Fabric license, you should consult the agreement that you executed with CostQuest, consult their FAQ, or reach out to them directly. Here's a look at what CORS looks like, which is where you'll create your FCC username and password, and CORS will then assign you an FRN after you have filled in all the applicable information. This FRN is tied to your entity in the BDC system. Remember that the username and password that you created in CORS is the same username and password that you use to log in the BDC system. After you create your username and password in CORS, you are assigned an FRN. Your entity will appear in the BDC system. The first time you log in, you'll click on your FRN and begin filling out the required information for your particular entity. When selecting your entity type, this should coincide with the type of entity that you selected in CORS. While you're filling out your entity's information, you'll want to select the data that you'd like to submit. If you only want to submit bulk crowdsource and challenge data, all you need to do is check that box, which will ultimately kick off the review process for the FCC when they forward that information on to CostQuest. The other box deals with submitting broadband availability data, which is for those entities that are submitting availability data, such as providers. I'd like to take a second to address what bulk crowdsourced data is. We'll talk more about this in future webinars, but ultimately bulk crowdsourced data applies more to the fixed broadband availability challenge. Challengers will have the option to submit crowdsourced data, which is ultimately not a challenge, but the data will be collected into the system. The provider is not required to respond to Fabric challenges or crowdsourced data, but an ISP that has reported broadband availability at a challenged location in the Fabric will receive a notification and can respond to the challenge on a voluntary basis. If you aren't familiar with the challenge types, this is the meat and potatoes of the challenge process, and being familiar with the types of challenges and what they entail will help you create successful challenges. It is important that you have your Fabric file in hand before trying to challenge anything. Everything is based on the Fabric, and if you don't know the Fabric locations, you won't know what to challenge. In total, there are 7 types of challenges and technically 9 scenarios that could make up those 7 challenges. You'll see that each challenge type that we're going to cover has a number next to it. These are the actual challenge type codes that you'll use when formatting your challenges. So for instance, if you're challenging a missing broadband serviceable location, that challenge type code in your CSV will be number 1. You'll utilize challenge type code 1 whenever there is a particular structure missing from the Fabric and is also considered a BSL. An example of this is new construction that may not have been in the source data when the data was initially aggregated. Keep in mind that not only is a BSL considered at the structure level, but in order to be considered a BSL, it should also be habitable. A missing BSL is one of a couple challenges that gives you the most bang for your buck when challenging the Fabric, since if successful, it will be adding a BSL to your particular geography. Challenge code 2 is whenever there is an incorrect primary address of a BSL in question. For instance, if the Fabric lists an address as 123 Sample Street, but it should be 124 Sample Street. Challenge type 3 is an incorrect location unit count. This is whenever there is a particular structure where the unit count is incorrect, such as a duplex having a unit count of 1 where it should actually be 2, or a condo unit having a unit count of 50 where it should actually be 40. Challenge type 4 is when the location building type code is incorrect. There are a total of 6 building type codes in the Fabric challenge process. An example of an incorrect building type code is if a building has a code of B denoting that it's only structure. However, that building may have residential apartments above, which would mean that building type code X would need to be used to mark that location as a business, and residential location. Challenge code 5 is when a location is not within the correct footprint of a building on a particular parcel. For instance, if I have a piece of property and a barn out back was selected as the BSL, but my home was actually the BSL, challenge code 5 would be used to move that BSL to the correct footprint. Challenge code 5 is only for within parcel moves and not parcel to parcel moves. Challenge code 6 is to be used when a particular location is not broadband serviceable. Enterprise buildings and other buildings that don't demand mass market service are not considered BSLs. Other examples of non-BSLs can include chicken coops, barns, or a cabin in the woods that doesn't have electricity. Lastly, challenge code 7 is when there are multiple addresses associated with a single structure. Think of multi-unit buildings where each unit has their own address. The structure is the BSL and each individual unit impacts the unit count. A good guideline to follow is that if you drop the apartment number from an address and it matches the structure's address, then there's no reason to file a missing BSL challenge. However, you can add a supplemental address using challenge code 7. When matching addresses in the fabric, you should be using both the active and the secondary address file when trying to match locations. Some reminder for challenges is that depending on your desired outcome, a particular outcome might involve multiple challenges. For instance, before we mentioned that a challenge type code 5 is for within parcel movements only. However, if you need to move a BSL from one parcel to another, this involves challenge code 6 to drop the BSL from a particular location, and then challenge type 1 to add that BSL to another. Also an example on the right where there is a structure with one unit and one address, but in reality might have 2 units and 2 addresses. A challenge would use challenge code 3 to change the unit count of the BSL, and then challenge code 7 to add a supplemental address to the secondary address file if necessary. Also remember that the fabric follows USPS CAS addressing standards, so other standardization methods might not match up to the fabric if you're receiving a large number of addresses that don't match. You'll also want to take into consideration that even if new construction has been addressed and parceled, that if a structure doesn't exist, it won't be in the fabric and there's no need to submit a challenge yet. Formatting challenges can be quite time consuming, and depending on the challenge determines which fields are required for a particular challenge. Here's a little guide that I had created for formatting challenges. First and foremost, all submissions must be a CSV. Second, even if you aren't utilizing all fields in the data spec, all fields are required in your challenge file, whether they are null values or not. There are no minimum number of challenges per file, and you're limited to 250,000 challenges per challenge file. You can upload additional challenge files if you exceed the 250,000 challenges per file, however. As I mentioned, depending on the challenge type you're submitting will determine the fields that you're required to fill out or leave null. For instance, if you're challenging a missing BSL, everything in blue in row 2 in the image is left null. If you're challenging a missing BSL, but also don't know the address or one hasn't been established, there is a second scenario of required fields for that type. The same is true for incorrect primary addresses, where there are 2 types of scenarios for that particular challenge code, depending on the information you have. Those 2 types of scenarios are denoted on the image with BSL lacks address in parentheses. Once you have collected and formatted all of your challenges in a CSV, you're then ready for BEC system submission. Once you log in, you'll click on your FRN, enter the submissions dashboard. You'll then create your submission by clicking on the Create Submission button and selecting Crowdsource Challenge from the submission type box. Another dropdown will appear where you'll select Bulk Fabric Challenge. In the future, this is where you'll be able to submit bulk crowdsourced and challenge data for the fixed broadband challenge process. In crowdsourced challenge submission section, bulk fabric challenge will now appear. Clicking that will take you to your next screen. Here you'll be presented with what boils down to a 3-step process for submitting challenges. The first step is to upload your challenge file you created by clicking Upload Challenge File and browsing to your CSV, and then clicking Upload Data. On ingest, the BDC system will process your file for viruses and errors. And if the data processed through, you'll be greeted with friendly green check marks and a green valid data status next to your challenge file, and then a file summary, which contains the types of challenges in your file and the total count of each challenge type submitted. If you didn't format your data correctly, the BDC system will throw an error, and you'll be greeted with a not so friendly red data status and a bright red error message indicating the type of error. Sometimes the errors are a bit cryptic, like the error in the picture. This error denotes an issue with the CSV encoding. If you receive this error, you'll want to change your encoding from UTF-8 to just a plain CSV. That's a free one for you all today. Next, in the three-step process, you'll need to upload the evidence you have for the basis of your challenges. The FCC does not require evidence for each challenge within a file. However, the FCC does expect evidence for each challenge type submitted. So for instance, in my sample file on the right, there are 6 types of challenges in my file. So the FCC would expect 6 types of evidence. Now you may be asking yourself what constitutes as evidence. First, evidence can be in the form of a PDF file or a description in the free text box in the screenshot. You don't need to submit an evidence file and a description in the box. You just need to submit one or the other. Again, the FCC expects evidence for each challenge type that you have submitted. What constitutes as evidence is difficult to say, as it will vary from location to location, county to county, and the data that you use to determine that the fabric was incorrect. Evidence, however, can be in the form of screenshots, building permits, analysis of some sort, or at a minimum, a description of the basis of the challenge. The final step in the three-step process is certifying your data. This means that you're attesting to the accuracy and the truthfulness of the challenges that you're submitting to the FCC. You'll also be able to view your challenges on the map prior to the certification so that you can visually verify that they are in fact in the correct locations associated with your challenge or challenges. Once you've certified your data and the challenge has been submitted, on the submissions dashboard page, you'll be able to view the total number of submissions and the total number of challenges. The submissions denote how many total files you've uploaded that are submitted, accepted, rejected, and under review. The total challenges show how many challenges you have submitted in total from all of your submissions that are pending, accepted, and rejected. You can continue to come back to this page for the status of your challenges, as well as to create new challenge submissions. From this screen, you'll also be able to download your challenge results. There will be a process in place for anyone that does not want to submit bulk challenge data to do so through the individual challenge process. Maybe your organization believes it only has a few fabric locations to challenge, or it's too cumbersome to go through the process of FRN setup and BDC submission, or maybe as a consumer, your house just isn't showing up in the new national broadband map. Individual challenges to the fabric will be allowed and will commence after the new national broadband map is released this fall. This process will be relatively easy and straightforward, where challenges will occur directly in the new map interface. No FRN, cores, or BDC system access will be required to submit individual fabric challenges. Users of the new national broadband map will be able to challenge locations that should be added or removed from the fabric, along with correcting street addresses, the unit count of a BSL, and the geographic coordinates of a BSL if it is in the incorrect location. Difficult question to answer is, what's the best way to go about analyzing my fabric file? As I mentioned earlier, the source data used, the number of locations, the accuracy of the data, and the technical ability of staff will vary from location to location and organization to organization. Budgets, time, and staff allocations will also be different across the US and territories. That being said, the right tool for the job for one organization may not be the same as it is for another. The fabric, however, is inherently a geospatial data set. It can be helpful to have geospatial tools in order to see what your fabric looks like on the ground. The same geospatial tools can aid in analysis of the fabric as well. Check with your organization to see what tools you have available, such as ArcGIS Pro. If your organization doesn't have the budget for geospatial software, look into some of the free open source options, such as QGIS. If scripting is your thing, GeoPandas and PostGIS might be a good option for you as well. Also, Excel can be used for address matching, but you won't necessarily have the ability to view the data. And if it's an option for your organization, you can look into working with a vendor as well. Just be certain before installing any software that you have permission from your IT first. It's also important to keep in mind that if you're geocoding addresses, that your mileage may vary depending on the geocoder that you're using. Free geocoders may not do a great job, and some geocoders interpolate addresses based on a range of addresses. This means that a geocoder may place geocoded points at interpolated coordinates along the center line of a road. Any challenge submitted where the XY coordinates are not on a structure will be rejected. So ensure that your challenges are not placed along the center lines of roads, but within the footprint of a structure. So what's next? Michael Baker will be conducting 2 more webinars on the fixed broadband availability challenge, as well as the mobile broadband availability challenge. For fixed broadband availability challenges, those are anticipated to start after the new broadband maps are released, which is slated for this month. Mobile broadband challenges will be down the road and will allow users to challenge mobile broadband availability by utilizing on-the-ground speed tests through the FCC speed test app or an approved third-party app. Additionally, entities will be able to submit bulk challenges that adhere to the FCC's data spec via API, as well as other means. We've created a challenge hub that is free and openly available to stay up to date on the latest information regarding all the FCC challenges. The QR code on your screen will take you directly there, and we'll also drop a link in the chat. There's a lot of information on the Challenge Hub, from web mapping applications to story maps, so feel free to poke around. We're constantly updating it as well as new information is getting released. Bulk fabric challenges opened up to providers and governments on September 12th, so if you haven't obtained access to your fabric, you can already go out and get started. Ensure you have the staff or vendor to support your challenges. Always follow FCC BDC guidance and work closely with your broadband office. There is no deadline for challenges, and challenges will be accepted by the FCC on a rolling basis. So keep challenging to ensure that the most accurate information is reflected in the fabric. The only time constraint associated with your challenge submission impacts which binage of the fabric your successful challenges will be reflected in. Thank you, everybody, for your time, and Andrew and I's contact information if anybody would like to get a hold of us.
Thanks, Sean. Excuse me. Yeah, like Sean said, there's going to be 2 more webinars that haven't been scheduled yet, but the next one's going to be how to challenge the fixed mobile, or excuse me, the fixed broadband challenges versus what the ISPs are saying that might be unserved or underserved versus what your local data sets are saying, wait a minute, this is actually unserved, but you're saying it's served. Those kind of examples would be that the fixed mobile one, the fixed broadband one, and then the mobile one down the road, which Sean, I believe the FCC really doesn't have much information yet with the mobile challenge stuff. Same kind of scenario where, you know, a Verizon Wireless or a T-Mobile is saying that a certain area is providing coverage, but you have evidence that it doesn't. So once we get more data and more FCC, as the months go by and FCC continues to disclose information and post it to their website, you know, we'll be hosting those type of webinars as well. Let's see, let me check the questions. So one of the questions, Sean, is the fabric challenge an FCC reporting requirement?
The fabric challenge is not a reporting requirement. You can request your fabric and not have to submit any challenges. The availability data that providers submit is based on the fabric, but nobody is required to challenge the fabric, no.
What if you overstate? One of the questions is, what if you overstate the number of addresses submitted for a challenge? Example, if it's unclear that cabins have electric or not, but you submit anyway. Under the time constraints, I don't see how we could scrub that data to that level anyhow.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd recommend, when in doubt, submit it as a challenge, and the FCC and CostQuest, when they go through their process of rebuilding the fabric, each vintage and everything, they'll have their ways of determining what the footprint is. It's a good point. It's difficult to say whether it has actual electric service, because it might be completely off grid and use solar power and things like that. So it's a good question, and I would recommend putting it in your challenge file, since you wouldn't know anyways, down to that level. But you keep in mind, you are going to have to submit evidence. So just anything, when in doubt, just keep in mind that you will have to have some sort of evidence file associated with challenge types, not necessarily that individual challenge though.
Okay, and I answered some of the questions in the link. One individual asked about the CostQuest email, and I sent that off already.
Cool.
And then the presentation will be available to all the people who registered today too. FYI on that.
Great.
If there's not any other questions, we can give you about 18 minutes back of your time. I appreciate everybody that came and listened to the webinar today. I know the challenge process is pretty cumbersome, and but if you have the right steps, it's not too bad. That's where Sean's pretty knowledgeable in that aspect of things. So feel free to reach out if needed.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Well, everybody, have a good day and enjoy it. And we'll keep you posted on other future webinars that come down the pike when the next one is about the fixed broadband challenge. Thank you.
Thank you.